Hello, welcome to my first real kind of YouTube video here. This is speed modeling the Prob Droid. Alright, technically I'm calling it speed modeling, but it's not really. It's just a time lapse with some advice and description of some of the techniques that I used. Also, let me say right up front that I love the Prob Droid. It's one of my favorite props or characters, depending on how you look at it, from The Empire Strikes Back, and seeing as this is the 40th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back, I thought this would be a good time to release this. Also, that said, I want to point out that I built this entirely without blueprints. This is my interpretation of the Prob Droid. This is not an official recreation or trying to be extremely accurate. This is just me eyeballing it and doing a lot of stuff from memory. You'll see right here at the beginning that I go online and download a bunch of reference images to try and get a better idea of the organic nature of the design of this droid. Also, for full disclosure, Hasbro released a Black Series Prob Droid. I guess you'd call it an action figure, but it's a very highly detailed one that I have here on my desk in front of me. That did not come out until I was about halfway done with this, but I bought it and used that for a lot of my reference. Alright, so let's get started here. Like I said, first thing I did is downloaded a bunch of reference images. One of the things I noticed is all of these images are very different. So one of the things I did is I made this collage, this palette. You'll see this slide in a number of times. Alright, so let's start laying out the basic geometry. Prob Droid, as you know, it's basically a head, a body, legs, and lots of eyes. One of the things I wanted to do was just kind of map out where everything was as quickly as possible. So, you know, the head is kind of a flattened sphere. I used fall-offs to get the basic shapes of that. Oh, this box. So one of the things I've found that while working on something that's kind of radial or round, it becomes very easy to get lost. So it's very important to include some kind of a direction finder. Yes, the XYZ indicator in the bottom corner there gives you a perfect idea of where you are in space. But when you're looking at the geometry, you're not always looking down into that corner. So it just kind of gives me a front. So now I have kind of a directionality to it. These grooves or these insets is one of the key design features of the Prob Droid, and trying to figure out exactly how many divisions I needed to get around the body to be able to do these little bevels or insets was kind of tricky. You'll see me go back and forth here a number of times trying to figure out the subdivision of the main part of the body. Also, frankly, just where they lay out, because in all of my reference images, it's it's kind of hard to discern exactly the number and spacing of these. That's kind of what led me to get the Black Series Prob Droid, so I could actually hold it in my hand and look at it and kind of figure out how this stuff is laid out. Again, this is just me laying out some basic details, just getting a good sense of how things are going to feel early on here. Again, just putting down cubes and capsule shapes just to give it a little bit of extra detail as I'm working forward on it. Yeah, you see me here. I'm going to go back and forth between a number of different techniques. This little hat that goes on the top of the head of the Prob Droid. At first I was like, I'll do this with mesh fusion, and then I realized that that was probably overkill for what I needed to do. So I ended up just making a separate piece, and then once I realized that I had made them both with the same number of radial subdivisions, I just welded them together and then it became part of the geometry. Let's talk about the eye placement really quick. This is a very short piece of the clip here, so let's go fast. creating detail on something that's radial can be very tricky to do. What I have learned for the most part is the best way to do it is create them on an axis and then just rotate the entire object based on the origin. And that way each one of these eyes has a Y rotation of a certain value. When I need to add more detail to it, I can reset that value back to 0. That eye, that lens, the camera will be perfectly along an axis. I can use symmetry, I can use all kinds of basic tools that work best on an XYZ axis, and then reset it back to whatever that Y rotation is for the mesh item. And that way they kind of all, I've mapped them out. I've given, this you see me here basically laying out the map. What I call it, it's a radial, the radial placement of all these different cameras and stuff, but I'm just using cylinders at the moment, and we'll add detail here in a couple of minutes. Now I'm going into the legs. Same thing with legs. Legs are incredibly detailed on the Prob Droid, but I just wanted to get something in here as quickly as possible to give it some sort of scale, position, just to give me a sense of space. So here's a quick note about the way that I recorded this. I'm on a Mac. I'm using a program called, oh, I totally forgot what it's called. Hold on 1 second. It is I Show You Instant, and it will record anything that you do on your screen, and it's actually a really nice program. I had a version of it for quite a while and never really used it for anything, but I recently discovered, which led to why I'm doing this, that it has a time-lapse mode. You can record 1 frame a second, which is what this is recorded at. But it also will set a timer, so it will record for a set number of, like for example, each of the clips that you're seeing, I set it to record for 30 minutes. So I would start, I would continue to work, and then it would give me like a 5-second countdown at the end. And that way, A, I would take a break every half hour, and B, I could kind of keep the clip sizes down to a reasonable amount. You'll notice that I have started adding little fiddly bits of detail here. I'm betting that this is right when the Black Series Prob Droid showed up, and I could actually start looking at this in more 3-dimensional detail. The images that I created on that palette, they're all from different builds, different versions of toys and sculpts that have been made over the years, and none of them are the same. When you really get down and look at the detail of them, they're all, they're all of the same thing, but they're not the same thing. And that's kind of how I looked at my build here. This is the Brad Hayes Prob Droid. Like you'll notice in the final version of the render that was at the beginning, and again I will play the turntable at the end there. I didn't even finish like the shoulder-mounted blaster that's that's used in the movie. I just never got there. There's also quite a bit of detailing on the upper deck of the lower body that I just didn't get around to yet. I kind of got to the point where I was happy with the way it looked. I wanted to see it rendered out, and then I started making this video, and here we are. So here I am starting to work on some of the details for some of the cameras and the lenses. One of the things that you'll notice is there are 3 of these, what I call the spherical lenses. I know what a spherical lens is, and this is actually just it's a spherical lens on top of a ball on top of a ball. And there are 3 of those. And then there are 2 that are clusters of 3 of these little spheres. But I wanted to give each little piece there, you can see I'm giving them a little lip, just to add a little bit more detail. So I figure at this point I've got most of the eyes. The mapping worked out, so I'm gone back and I'm starting to add the detail in here. And so I'm just going to let this run for a few minutes. At this point, while modeling, my idea was to make everything sub-Ds. make everything very clean. Once I get into the legs, I kind of abandon that. I realize, of course, the legs are more mechanical, so they need to be less soft. Sorry, I'm not talking anymore. This is just the part where this is just me adding detail. So the two tools that I use the most in Modo probably are, by a long shot, bevel is the #1 tool. I use that for practically everything. It is between vert bevel, poly bevel, and edge bevel. It is one of the most useful tools in polygonal modeling. And then of course edge slice is the, sorry, not edge slice, loop slice is the other one that I use constantly. If I just had those two tools, I could probably model 80% of what I do. Of course, this is Modo, and Modo has an amazing array of tools. I kind of feel like this is was maybe too ambitious to do as my very first video, but I'm figuring out a lot of stuff, and I really had a good time doing this. So you could probably expect to see quite a few more of these. If you have any suggestions on things you'd like to see me model, or techniques you'd like me to talk about, feel free to leave a comment. So again, this is, I'm just exploring here and trying to figure out the best way to do these are. This is, I kind of started doing these captures, these time-lapse captures, so I could go back and watch kind of like a post-game playback, so I could kind of go back and study how I approached creating some of this. And frankly, I thought maybe this would be a good idea to post these. Somebody out there would probably enjoy watching this as much as I enjoyed making them. So, you know, enjoy. This is going to go on for quite a few more minutes here. Maybe I'll be back at the end. Alright, so I know that that was a lot of just moving points around and building these little legs. This video is way longer than it reasonably should be, but it's the first one that I've done. I gotta admit I had a blast doing it, and you can probably expect to see some more of these from me. One thing I did want to point out, there's a couple of videos that I recorded that got corrupted or didn't turn out very well. So, for example, probably thankfully, you will miss me doing the UV layout. But a couple of quick notes. What I did was I ended up... The way that I do this, because of the way that the shader tree in Modo works, is I find that a lot of times it's much easier to create one or two materials for the entire object, lay out the UVs very cleanly, and then take it into a paint program such as 3D Coat or Substance or something along those lines, and paint very detailed textures into it. You will see, in fact, here we go, here's 3D Coat. This is what I did my texturing in. And again, full disclosure, this is not the final textures that ended up in the render, but this is kind of how I laid out my materials. I usually just use a couple of layers. I almost always, when building something mechanical, I do an underlayer of metal, which is what you just saw, and then I do a layer of paint, which is where I end up adding most of the detail work, and then I'll add a layer of dirt on top of that. So generally speaking, it's just 3 layers. And again, going into a renderer such as Modo or V-Ray or something along those lines, there's only really 4 sets of maps that you need to export: diffuse color, roughness, normals, and specular color. And with those 4 maps, the way that Modo's standard material is laid out, you can pretty much get really beautiful textures. Here you see me exporting the textures. There you got a quick glimpse of the UVs. Sorry, it's the one thing about speed modeling is everything is very quick. Yeah, there's my first render. So here I go in and I'm doing some touch-ups to it and just tweaking it a little bit. I really liked that metal. That felt like that was almost there. In the final version, what I ended up doing is creating a double layer of paint. I toned down the size of the bitmaps so that the detail was quite a bit smaller on it. And then I added a second layer of paint, and the second layer of paint was mostly just kind of a rust-colored noise, but that laid on top of the black gave it what I feel was fairly close to most of the original photographs that I've seen. It's kind of a rusty brownish color. It's not black, as a lot of people seem to think it is. Anyway, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, leave them in the comments. Yeah, if you'd like to see something specific, I'm going to be probably doing some simple tutorials in Modo, and probably more of these. As long as I'm home and got nothing better to work on, I'm probably going to bang out. Maybe I'll do lightsabers next. They should be small, simple, fast, and fun. Anyway, thanks again for listening. Oh, here you see me fixing some of the UVs that I had that didn't quite work out. And there's the final product. There's my turntable. All right, everybody. Hey, thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate it. And here's till next time.